The biggest concern for Penn State football going into 2024 is its offensive line. But there's good news. They can fix that.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I mean, it's going to be tough to replace 3 NFL caliber starters from a season ago. And that's why Penn State's offensive line just might be the biggest concern going into this season. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Help me welcome him back, Landon Tengwall, former Penn State offensive lineman. We get an expert to help talk about this. A former offensive lineman gets to talk about Penn State's offensive line for this upcoming season. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And if you want to keep up with what Landon does, all the socials and platforms will be linked in the description. So he has a podcast of his own. You can check it out on YouTube. All the content creation that he is doing around Penn State football and football in general. Landon, the offensive line is, I mean, that's tough to replace 3 NFL caliber starters in Olu Fashanu being a top 15 pick to the New York Jets. And I look around and I say, okay, I like the potential of them, but honestly, with all the other position groups being as surefire as they are and what Penn State's offensive line has to replace, in my mind, they're the biggest question mark and probably the biggest concern by proxy.
Yeah, I definitely think they're up there as far as the biggest question mark for 2024. I think there's a couple on offense, but I will say I agree. When you lose 3 guys to the NFL draft that are all leaders, 5th year, 6th year type guys, that is going to affect an offensive line, especially, I've always talked about the tackles, but having Hunter Norzad, someone who's a 6th year, essentially carried himself like an NFL veteran. And he was, would sit in on coaching meetings, he carried himself very differently than most. So to have that as your center and your leader on the offensive line, that can't be overstated how important that really is. But I will say Nick Dawkins, I think, is someone that we all know. He knows his responsibility. He knows his role. He is a leader on the team. People love him in the community. So that's definitely really positive that we have him stepping into that center role. But I talk about it all the time. I feel like there's not enough people that speak about the fact of not only Olu Fashanu, but Caden Wallace had a pretty fantastic year last year. I think a lot of people dogged him for a while there early on, especially I remember when I first got here. And it's like 5th year came and he was locked in. He knew what time it was. He wanted to get drafted, and he had a great year. And he's an athletic dude. He did well in the combine, and the Patriots took a shot on him in the 3rd round, and it looks like he might start at them for right tackle. So, I think that's difficult anytime you go from, and Drew Aller, who, we've seen one of his bigger struggles is when he's under pressure. And now you take away those 3 guys, and mainly Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu. When you have those sides protected, I don't think Olu let up a sack. Caden might have let up 1 sack. Now you plug in either Anthony Donker, Drew Shelton, Javen Williams, Nolan Rucci. Now I think there's a lot of depth there, and we're going to get into that. And I think there's a lot of talent and potential, but it's not Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu. It's just they're not going to be that good. So I am a little bit worried about that protection, how it's going to hold up. But I will say, though, Anthony Donker did play a lot in that Ole Miss Peach Bowl. He did really well. You didn't even really notice when Caden Wallace left the game. Donker came in, and he was honestly pretty dominant. I was watching it. I thought it was really impressive for someone in their first start. And I've talked about this before. Someone else that got their first start in a bowl game at the end of their freshman year, a couple years ago, Olu Fashanu got his first start at the Outback Bowl in 2021, had a great game. We know where that went. Could be something similar for Anthony Donker. But I'm excited to get into this and talk about some projections where we think guys are going to end up, and let's dive into this a little bit deeper.
I still want to dissect 2023 a little bit because as much NFL caliber talent moved on for Penn State, Hunter Norzad, again, a day 3 pick, but I think he's going to have a long career in the NFL. Caden Wallace, Patriots viewed him as a 3rd round pick, and we always had Olu Fashanu somewhere around the top 10. whether he left earlier or the way he left for the 2024 NFL draft. And part of the reason, I just want to add this in there, you mentioned Drew Aller, not getting banged up a lot, because he has actually really good pocket mobility. Everyone wants to say that he's a statue, but the way that Aller's able to shift within tight quarters there, he's able to move around in the pocket. I think it's really underrated as far as his game as a quarterback. He's truly not a statue. But looking at 2023, the Pro Football Focus grades, the analytics said that Penn State's offensive line was average. So Landon, you and I are talking about how this group is probably going to take a step back, but honestly, they were average to above average at points in time. Sure, Fashanu and Wallace had great individual performances, same as Norzat. I thought JB Nelson was kind of that next in line as far as who had the best performances overall, and he graded out very well, but still collectively, it was average. Sometimes it was below average. Sometimes they had good performances, but not all too often when you look at the analytics. So do you think that had to do somewhat with scheme, opponent, right? Because if you're losing, we're talking about losing all this top talent, and they were average with that top talent according to the grades.
Yeah, I think it does matter how you look at it. For example, like you talk about opponent, I think we had to throw the ball almost 50 times against Ohio State. That's going to be difficult on an offensive line when they know you're dropping back. They're going to pin their ears back and they get to rush up field. And we're also talking about Ohio State's defensive line. So that can get difficult. But I mean, that's just one game. I do think they were an above average offensive line because of, the three guys we listed. Sal Wormley, I guess he, decided to come back, didn't have the year he wanted to have. But I thought Vanga Ioane and JB Nelson played pretty well off of each other, and both of them kind of splitting some time. No one really knows who's going to win that job. I think that's something that's going to go down in camp. But I will say with Sal being a 6th-year guy, I think because Vanga and JB are both able to start, and they, Phil Trautwein sees them as hey, this guy, my 6th man, it could be a starter at any moment. I could see a lot of rotation with Sal. It's hard to play offensive line in college football for 6 years, so I can see them getting some reps off of Sal and Vanga. He played a lot of right guard, and JB switched around a lot too. So I am curious to see how that's going to look. But look, I do think there is going to be somewhat of a step back from a standpoint of sacks allowed, pressures allowed, running game, because then there's also just not that cohesiveness. Caden, Olu, Hunter, like all these guys played on the field together for over 2 years. And the offensive line, that group has to gel. You have to be comfortable with the man next to you to know, hey, I'm trusting that he is going to be there when he says he's going to be there. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So I think fans do have to give a little bit of a grace period for a young offensive line that is just trying to gel. And Drew Shelton, hasn't really played a ton since his freshman year after Olu got hurt back in 2022. Drew basically started, I think, the last 6 games, started the Rose Bowl, did really well, didn't play as much this past year, and then missed spring ball with an injury. So I hope he can kind of settle in, because it seems like he is that next guy for us at left tackle too.
We're going to take a quick break in the show, but when we return, we're going to talk about that starting offensive line and what the depth chart could look like. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. I love summertime because I love going to Major League Baseball games, and I've used the Gametime app to go to baseball games. I've used it to go to Pirates games, Phillies games. I've actually used it when I'm out of state, out of the area, to go to, for example, a Texas Rangers game before. So Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and they are the best place to go for your MLB tickets. And get this, prices on the Gametime app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch. Gametime isn't just for getting tickets to MLB games. They also have tickets for all sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You get last minute deals. You can save up to 60% on those last minute tickets. You also have flash deals where you can actually save even more with exclusive in-app discounts on select seats ahead of the game or the event. You have all-in pricing, you have views of the seats, so you're not second guessing where you're going to be sitting, and the lowest price guaranteed. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So let's move to actually projecting starters and get into a little bit of the depth chart. No, we're not going to go 4 down the list, but we will maybe. How about a 2 deep? I think that's fair, Landon, or at least a starting 5, and then some guys that will rotate in and be almost either act as co-starters or see a good amount of playing time. My ideal starting 5, given everybody's healthy. I know Drew Shelton's battled some injuries, right? I know there were some other injury. Nick Dawkins has battled injuries as well. Everybody's healthy. Let's put that away right there. That's not a prerequisite here. I imagine that it's going to be Drew Shelton at left tackle, JB Nelson at left guard, Nick Dawkins as your center. At your right guard, you could have Sal Wormley, Vanga Ioane. Again, you mentioned that Ioane and Nelson might go up for the starting spot at the left guard. So that's kind of where that co-starter comes into play here. And then at right tackle, I imagine, again, what we saw, Donko graded out as the best offensive lineman for Penn State in that bowl game against Ole Miss, so he has to be your right tackle. Nolan Rucci is going to factor in. Of course, there's the promise of Javen Williams and Alex Birchmeier, but my starting 5 would be from left to right: Shelton, Nelson, Dawkins. I'm going to side with Wormley just because of that 6th year. He's the 6-year veteran, and then Donko at the right tackle. What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with you. I do think Vanga has a really good chance of fighting for JB at the left guard position. I mean, there is a lot more versatility inside just because it's so close quarters. It's not that hard to change over. So both of them have played. Sal's played left guard. JB's played right and left. I mean, everybody kind of is interchangeable. But I do think Vanga will give him a good run for his money as far as who's going to be that starter. But the rest of them, I totally agree. I think Javen Williams, it can be that swing tackle where he is really athletic. Now he just needs to come into himself a little bit more and just be a little more, under control. We saw in the spring game, he was having a pretty rough day going against a couple different dudes, Jamil Lyons. Felt like he was leaning. He was kind of on his toes, and he didn't look super comfortable. So I'm kind of hoping and excited to see him take that next step because we saw what he was. You'd see his high school tape, and he was so physical. And I think sometimes that's what an offensive lineman will lose when they get to college because they start thinking so much and there's so much worry. It's not just go kill someone anymore. You're having to go through that thought process of checking here, and now you're not being as physical. So I think as Javen Williams gets more comfortable, we will see him get back to that pulling tackle where he absolutely depletes somebody. And so I think that's something we could see out of him. I'm really excited about Cooper Cousins at center and guard. I think he can play both. It looked like he played some throughout the spring ball kind of game, a little bit of guard and throughout practices. And so now we got the versatility with the young cat. We're going to get him in early, it seems like, in those blowout wins. Let Nick Dawkins get out, get Cooper Cousins some playing time. And so, I'd say the one theme that we had last year and a little bit the year before that, but it's the depth. There is insane depth, and that's a shout-out to Coach Philip Troutwine because he has built this room from the ground up because I can promise you when he first came in, it was not like this. The offensive line was the punching bag of Penn State. I'd see it all over Twitter as a recruit, and I'd say we're going to change this, and I'm really happy we did, but we've got to give a shout-out to the coach himself because he has built this room where guys are prepared. Guys feel the night before the game like, hey, we can't do anything else to feel more prepared than where we're at. And so that kind of trickles down to the young guys, and it's really cool to see that. And that's the only way that you have depth in a position like this is if the young guys are falling in line with the older guys and kind of taking their lead of like, hey, let's go get this extra film study. Let's go get this extra work on the pass pro bags. So I will say that's the number one thing I think I'm excited about for this offensive line. I think the quality might take a step back at the beginning so everybody can gel, but the depth is still there. There is a hole too deep, I think, that could be very serviceable in the Big Ten.
I think Addison Penn could be in that group as well. Remember the transfer, right? I think a lot of people forget about him, that he's still with the group and can factor into some playing time as well. But those are generally the names that are going to come to mind. Landon, you know this just because you're a former football player and an athlete that as time goes on, right? I think Penn State's offensive line, it's when is that switch going to flip on for them? because a lot of these guys are young. And like you said, the chemistry takes time. You have to play actual games. You can't just simulate it all in practice going up against your fellow teammates. As much as that helps, you can attest to that. It's still not the same thing until you actually go hit somebody on the other side of the line of scrimmage, especially in the offensive line's case. But Anthony Donko, second year in the program. Alex Birchmeyer, second year in the program. Javen Williams, second year in the program. JB Nelson, second season of starting, co-starting. Same thing with Vanga Ioane. Nick Dawkins, same thing. Even though they're veterans, the one with the most true playing experience is Sal Wormley. And that's just one guy. We started off the episode with how Hunter Norzad and Caden Wallace and Fashanu, and then you combine Wormley, who was supposed to be a starter and then had the injuries earlier in his career as well. They would have played what? 2-3 seasons fully together. So that chemistry was there. So it's not that Penn State's offensive line is going to be bad the entire season or terrible, but those first, it's when can they figure it out? Because you have to put them almost on a deadline, because you can't have chemistry issues or inexperience or not knowing, certain things with the scheme or what to expect from a defense's standpoint. When you get to Ohio State, you got to figure it out as early as possible in the season, because then Ohio State, which JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, both came back when they should be in the NFL. They're going to make you pay for those little mistakes in between, the years.
Yeah, I do. I think they need to figure that out early on in the season when you're going up against West Virginia's defensive line, USC's defensive line, some smaller schools we're playing. That's when you get those kinks figured out. You're right. If we get to Ohio State and it's a problem, there's pressures, there's Drew getting hit, that is only going to be exacerbated now when we play Ohio State. And the guys you mentioned, which Penn State fans are not fond of. We've had some bad times with JT. And so, I just think it's interesting. It hasn't really been talked a lot. I don't see that much talk in the media of the fact that we are only returning one starter to the offensive line. I think that does say something about the way the fans have felt about the offensive line in the past couple of years. I mean, to be critical, I was a part of it, but we were decent. I think we were above average since 2022, and we have gotten a lot better.
Every single season that 2021, 22, 23 have all seen consistent improvement.
Yeah. I think I put out a stat that it was from 21 to where we are now. We started at 3.1 sacks a game, got down to 2.7 in 21, then 22. It kept going down, and we just had I think it was 1.4 sacks per game this past year, and then the rushing average has gone up too. So I'm excited, and I think Andy Kotelnicki is going to be a huge part of what this success looks like, because it seems like everything we've heard, it's like Andy Kotelnicki is now putting the defense at the disadvantage. That is his goal, to figure out, hey, how can I make this harder on them through what we're allowed to do pre-snap? So I'm excited to see it. I think it's going to be beneficial to the running backs if you're confusing the defense and making life hard on them. The offensive line, it's easier to block them up, and those running backs that we love so much can hit the hole, because those guys, we got two elite dudes in the backfield. So that's another thing that we need to get them going early, because we're going to have to rely on them in an Ohio State type game. We are Penn State. We are going to run the ball. So we cannot get out of a rhythm where we are passing almost 50 times in a game at Ohio State like last year. We need to be kind of in the driver's seat, or a close game where we can pound that rock. We can rely on Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and our guys up front.
Well, and that's why I mentioned scheme at the beginning, Landon. And it's not to just fully, hey, let's blow it out proportion, criticize Mike Yurcich. That's not what this discussion point is. But defenses essentially would sell out for the run, because how did Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen have electric freshman campaigns and then truly fell victim to the sophomore slump? You're supposed to, I get it. It's going into that second season. Defenses are more aware of you. They respect you more. You're not in your first year, but it was almost like night and day. Honestly, you just didn't feel that same type of presence from two guys that you said are some of the most incredible running backs in all of the country. And there's a lot of people that are just yep, Singleton, Allen, they're they're a solid dynamic duo, but that's all they are. They're, above average, right? And I still think they're some of the best running backs in the country, period. And they'd be Heisman's candidates if they didn't play on the same team, right? If they had the full workload of a true bell cow running back. Besides the point, but defenses would sell out for the run. And it almost made Penn State's offense predictable, one-dimensional, Andy Kotelnicki's an offensive line guy. He's a tight ends guy. So those two position groups are going to naturally benefit from his background as a football coach. But I think that Drew Aller is going to get the football out of his hands more. There's going to be some creativity to, like you said, keep the defense off balance, keep them at a disadvantage, and just by proxy, the offensive line just won't have to do as much.
Yeah, last year it's hard when your wide receivers are not making these big splash plays and you can't throw one up and have a guy go get a 50-50 ball for you and you just don't have that. It makes it a lot more difficult, and it puts a lot of stress. Honestly, it puts a lot of stress on Drew to make those plays, but then also it puts stress on the run game when you're constantly at 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9. It is really hard to be behind the sticks with the type of offense that Penn State ran, where it was, we're pretty run heavy. You start to get into those long down situations. It's just not favorable. And I think we saw it got a little bit better when Sider and Howe took over. There was a little bit more explosiveness. Nick Singleton in the passing game was fun to see. So I hope we see more of that. But I am really excited to see. I mean, we've seen what Kotelnicki's done in Kansas. We've all seen it. And then you look to the spring game and say, I didn't see much. But Caden Saunders was quoted after the game saying, someone asked him how much of the offense did we really see in this game. He said 5%. And we've heard quotes from other guys talking about all they do pre-snap is just motion. So I'm excited. It kind of, it sounds like that new school, like Shanahan, Andy Reid, where you see it in the NFL. They do all these cool trickery like plays, but it's all about putting the defense in a bind, confusing them. And so I hope we kind of bring that to Penn State, because I feel like we haven't really had that. It kind of felt like there wasn't too much of a shift from even when like Kirk Soraka left to Yurcich. Like the offense didn't look that different. And now it kind of sounds like this is going to be a complete overhaul. So I think a lot of Penn State fans are excited about that. And I think it was kind of needed to let's just complete new playbook. Let's throw the old one out and let's get some explosives in here, because that is one of the biggest things that this offense needs, is to get pumped full of some big gains, because that's really what gets an offense flowing, and that's when you get a defense on their heels and you can pound the ball with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen.
Still more on the way about this offensive line, but we're going to narrow it down a little bit and talk about specific players that need to step up this season. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. We started the show very broad, just speaking, hey, do we think the offensive line is going to be a problem, or are they going a liability, or can they actually get better? And yes, they can get better over the course of the season, because that's the thing. They just need to gel and have some time to experience, but get that additional experience. But let's actually hyper focus on individuals who could make or break the season for the offensive line. If this offensive line is going to succeed, who has to step up? So that's the veterans to Sal Wormley. That's probably an easy choice, or someone that's flying under the radar. Again, a Birchmeyer, a Williams. Cooper Cousins is my pick. I think Cooper Cousins could start at any of the three positions: center, either guard spots, either tackles. That's how versatile he is. He came in with college-ready size, and if he ends up starting the final 4 games of the season, I would not be shocked. And maybe it even comes sooner than that. Maybe by game 5 or 6, halfway through, he is one of the starters. He's just better than who we projected as the starting 5 to begin the season. Or there's an injury, he comes in and he's really anchored it down by the time he gets there.
Yeah, I'm a big Cooper Cousins fan, so I agree with everything you said. I think he does have the possibility to start if he takes care of business, which he does seem to be that type of guy where certain guys kind of have that NFL veteran mindset to them, where they come in, they handle their business, and they're never in question of what's going on in the play. They know their role. So I'm really excited for Cooper being a young dude. I think he'll be out of here in 3 years probably. He is a dominant cat. But everybody talks about it. I have to go, and I've been saying this since even before the Peach Bowl last year when I was playing. Like Anthony Donko, he is going to be a big-time dude because of the way that he moves. His long arms, pretty similar to Olu. They have pretty similar length in their arms. I talked to Olu the other day, and he's like, dude, Anthony Donko, he's like, his set is cleaner than mine. Like we all talk about how gifted this guy is. And so I'm just really excited to see how he's going to progress. I think he probably took a big step this past spring ball. We didn't get to see him really in the spring game. But he's a big dude now. He is solid. I think he just got listed at 326. So he's putting on the weight that you wanted to see on him. And now I'm excited to see him ball out. But, I was watching his tape, and it's so natural and easy for him in pass protection. And it reminds you a lot of Olu just because of the way they move. They're both a little awkward when they were younger and just kind of didn't look like they moved super fluidly. And then you kind of start to see it come together. I've seen his set recently. It looks really good, really clean. So I'm excited about Anthony Donka. I think he could be someone that plays for 2 years and he's out of here. Similar kind of to what Olu could have done, decided to come back and get his degree. But Anthony Donka is someone to me that can be that next elite dude on this offensive line where we had Rasheed Walker, then we had a couple other dudes, we had Olu. I think he's the guy that's next up that's going to kind of carry that name of the offensive lineman on the Penn State football team.
Landon, who do you look? Obviously, the choice is going to be Nick Dawkins since he is the veteran center, but who do you look to as either the obvious leader, if it is Nick Dawkins, great, or maybe I should rephrase it this way, the best overall lineman that needs to set the example. So not necessarily the vocal leader, that captain, if you will, but someone by play alone is going to set the example and be the best overall out of any of them. I would imagine it's, like I said, JB Nelson just graded out very well, even though he was a co-starter a season ago, needed that time to develop, but I feel like he is finally here. And I feel like right now he's the best of the group and who I see as an immediate NFL talent. I look around and it's like I still need to see more from Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, guys like Donko and Cooper Cousins. Hey, we can project their potential all we want, but until they do it, they can't be in an NFL conversation just because they haven't done anything yet, right? But in this case, JB Nelson is the closest to that where he can be draftable and maybe a 4th or a 5th round pick. So he'd be my pick as the best overall lineman to this point.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that assessment. I think from an NFL GM standpoint and what they look at, JB is the most likely to get drafted after this year. I do think, though, that Nick Dawkins is probably the leader, just the kind of the role that he's played. He's one of the leaders on the team. So he is one of the guys on the offensive line. But I'd say Sal Wormley. I mean, someone who's been here for 6 years and you are kind of anchoring a young offensive line where none of these guys have really played together. You need that old head that if stuff is going haywire, it's like they can say, hey, let's snap back. Let's bring our focus back. And you can respect him. And he doesn't always talk all the time. Sal's not a really loud guy, but we need him for those moments where it's a little bit of chaos. He needs to bring all these young cats back and say, hey, we got this. We need to trust our training. We understand what we can do. Now let's go out and show people. So for my pick of kind of what you described, I think it needs to be Sal Wormley for the group. While Nick Dawkins is still kind of that leader, I think getting that fire from that older guy who doesn't always talk means so much. Like for us in 2022 when we were on the Rose Bowl, Jair Brown was that guy. He didn't talk all the time, but when he did, everybody listened because he was such a baller, and we knew if Tig was going to speak up, he had something to say that we needed to listen. And almost all the time, guys would react in a positive manner and do good things with that feedback. So I'm hoping that Sal can be kind of that guy on us for the offensive line this year.
Last topic, who needs this season the most, whether that's for them personally, to build on their time at Penn State, to vault into an NFL draft spot, if that is a veteran. The name that I think of is Javen Williams, because like you said, we talked about the blue-white game, saying that, hey, just had some trouble, showed some weaknesses, needs to clean it up. Jameel Lyons had a really good day in particular, and going up against Javen Williams, he was showing inexperienced rookie mistakes. I feel like Williams, because of the pedigree that he brought in as the best prospect in the entire state of Pennsylvania, a top 10 prospect, if I'm not mistaken, from the class of 2023 in the nation, and he's very far away from that billing. So if anybody needs this season to go well, I don't expect him to be a consistent starter, but someone that comes in, sees a good amount of playing time, is someone that can be trusted to rotate in. It's Javen Williams for me.
Yeah, I like that pick. For me, I'm going to go a little bit of a wild card. I'll go with Nolan Rucci here. I'm really excited because he was really raw. That was kind of the knock on him. Even when he was a 5-star coming out, this is a raw dude. He's not going to play right away. You have to sculpt him. And I don't really know exactly what happened at Wisconsin, but we talked about what Philip Troutwine does and the way he's able to remodel an offensive line room and then even guys within that room. I'm excited to see what he can do with Nolan Rucci. I mean, it's a dude that is like 6'8". He has the frame. He just got listed, I believe, at like 325 up in there. So he's he did a good job. He was at training table, clearly a lot eaten up. So, the potential's there. I don't think he had the best spring game, but I think that is someone who we talk about everybody. There's injuries. There is circling guys in and out. There's going to be games we're up by a lot. He's going to see a lot of playing time. So I'm interested to see. I don't know where he fits in. If it's Anthony Donkin, Drew Shelton are pretty solidified, but he has the potential to be an elite offensive tackle just because of his body and the way that he can move. But there definitely needs to be a lot of different things technically that he has to work on. But now that weight's there, so I'm kind of excited to see what he can do. And Zach, it makes me excited once again. We keep coming to the topic of we're talking about these guys that backups could compete for time. That's a good. I mean, that just spells out, hey, we have depth. If guys get injured, whatever it may be, we are able to handle this. So I do think, to answer the whole question of the show, I don't think this is the biggest concern. I think there's a couple other that could be up there a little bit higher than offensive line. But anytime you have four starters, basically four new starters on an offensive line, it's going to be a little bit crazy at first. You just got to keep that cohesiveness and have those old dudes, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, to bring everything back together.
He is Landon Tengwall, former Penn State football offensive lineman, former Penn State letterman, joining us here on Locked On Nittany Lions. I encourage everyone down in the description, go check out all of his platforms. They will be linked in the description. Go check out his content creation centered around Penn State football. Of course, does great work with everything that he does as far as shows, special guests, and cool content as well, like you did getting together with Anthony Donko to see how much he could eat at Chick-fil-A. So that's just a taste, pun intended, of what you can find over at Landon's channel. Landon, thanks so much for the time, taking time out of your busy schedule to come hang out with me here on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.
And as always, thanks so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Be a part of the discussion with myself and Landon. Down in the comments section, is the offensive line of concern to you? Who do you think is going to break out? Who needs to step up this season? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this episode, of course, leave a like on it. Please share it with friends and family. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And of course, don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.